Good morning. My name is Mary Blanton and I'm your service coordinator today on this sunny but chilly early fall day. Somehow this morning when I looked at the thermometer and it was 44, I went, this feels like October, not September. So our minister, Leon Dunkley, will be giving the reflection today titled The Importance of Truth. As the description of the reflection says, we are living in a time of truth and alternative truth. Facts and alternative facts. How have we as a society allowed ourselves to stray so far from truth and facts? As individuals, we often have different perspectives on any given situation, depending our age, our upbringing, where we live, who we know. The dictionary defines perspective as a particular attitude toward or a way of regarding something. Perspectives are not fact or truth, but a point of view. In our politically charged world, it's all too easy for me to be dismissive of points of view that are opposite of mine, or ones I think are based on alternative facts. In this week's In Touch, there was an announcement for an October 15th Braver Angels workshop titled Civil Conversations Across the Political Divide. I plan to attend as I want to learn and practice listening and speaking skills for civil disagreement. Maybe some of you would like to join me. We also would love to have anybody sign our guest book if they come in late. We now have large print copies of our order of service and the hymns if anybody needs them. And if anybody would like a hearing device, please raise your hand and somebody will help. As always, there are many things happening at the North Chapel. Sustainable Woodstock's window dressers will start building window inserts in the social hall this Thursday, September 12th, and will continue through the 19th. They're hoping to find more volunteers to donate food for lunches and to run the kitchen during the meals. If you could help, please let Joanne or me know. I helped last year and it was lots of fun. I'll do it again too. Our Fall Chamber Music Series begins next Sunday at 2 p.m. For information about this concert and many other more wonderful things happening at the North Chapel, please read your order of service or look on the website, www.northchapelvt.org. And Tatum is here. There was a little nervous moment. And last but not least, please turn off anything that beeps, buzzes, or jingles. The opening words this morning are a poem by Maya Angelou, A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space, past aloof stars, across the way of indifferent suns, to a destination where all signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And when we come to it, to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure air to cool our palms, when we come to it, when the curtain falls on the minstrel show of hate and faces sooted with scorn are scrubbed clean, when battlefields and coliseum no longer rake our unique and particular sons and daughters up with the bruised and bloody grass to lie in identical plots in foreign soil. When the rapacious storming of the churches, the screaming racket in the temples have ceased, when the pennants are gaily waving, when the banners of the world tremble stoutly in the good, clean breeze. When we come to it, when we let the rifles fall from our shoulders and children dress their dolls in flags of truce, when landmines of death have been removed and the aged can walk into evenings of peace, when religious ritual is not perfumed by the incense of burning flesh, and childhood dreams are not kicked awake by nightmares of abuse. When we come to it, then we will confess that not the pyramids with their stones set in mysterious perfection, nor the gardens of Babylon hanging as eternal beauty in our collective memory, not the Grand Canyon kindled into delicious color by western sunsets, nor the Danube, flowing its beautiful blue soul into Europe, not the sacred peak of Mount Fuji stretching to the rising sun. Neither Father Amazon nor Mother Mississippi, who, without favor, nurture all creatures in the depths and on the shores. These are not the only wonders of the world. When we come to it, we, this people on this minuscule and kithless globe, who reach daily for the bomb, the blade, and the dagger, yet who petition in the dark for tokens of peace. We, this people on this mote of matter, in whose mouths abide cankerous words which challenge our very existence. Yet out of those same mouths come songs of such exquisite sweetness that the heart falters in its labor and the body is quieted into awe. We, this people on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living. Yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people on this wayward floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world. That is when, and only when, we come to it. So we will now enter a time of prayerfulness and meditation.
I remember years ago, when I was still in this sort of discovering Joni Mitchell phase, that I came across an album called For the Roses that had on it a song that went, I am a woman of heart and mind, with time on her hands, no child to raise. Do you know the song? You come to me like a little boy, and I give you my scorn and my praise. It's a beautiful song, 6 verses, I think. And I remember feeling depressed that this woman I did not know had sort of collapsed my life into like 6.5 minutes, you know. She delivered to me what was an irresistible truth. I think that happens when you touch upon something that's sacred in one's art. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, and that's all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. John Keats, May of 1819, Ode to a Grecian Urn. There were two different Edward R. Murrows, one of the best journalists on record. There was the Edward R. Murrow who interviewed the rich and famous, Liberace, chief among them. And there was the Edward R. Murrow who challenged and ultimately defeated McCarthyism. There were two almost different Mike Wallaces of 60 Minutes fame. There was the one who almost wasn't allowed to take on the tobacco industry, and the one who was. And of course, there are two Dan Rathers, also from 60 Minutes. The one who reported stories before he challenged the integrity of a sitting president, and there is the one who quickly resigned after that challenge blew up in his face. Now, some of you may remember, there used to be game shows on TV about truth in the 50s and 60s. As a country, we were in the aftermath of the Second World War. We found ourselves kind of newly atop of the world with respect to our relative wealth. So we created these dorky TV shows about truth. What can I say? One of these shows was called Truth or Consequences, and the other one was called To Tell the Truth. Truth or Consequences is interesting to talk about in church on a Sunday morning because of its symbolism. The symbols of the show were the halo and the pitchfork. The halo, of course, was associated with angels, with heaven, and with truth. The pitchfork, on the other hand, was associated with the devil, with hell, and with consequences. To tell the truth is also interesting to talk about in church today because the truth matters so exquisitely. Truth or Consequences was a quirky little show with trick questions, awkward answers, and playful shenanigans. To tell the truth was more complicated. A panel of celebrities were presented with 3 contestants, all claiming to be the same person, Mr. X, let's say. 2 of the contestants could lie, and the third contestant, the real person, could not. The real person was bound by the rules of the game to tell the truth. 2 things are strange about this. One is it's strange to think that if Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad were the 3 contestants, it wouldn't be possible to play the game. Presuming their willingness, and despite what I imagine would have been their 3 great senses of humor. And 2, it's strange to think that game shows from half a century ago sometimes have more integrity than journalism these days. It's not strange, in certain cases, to think of certain contemporary newscasters as game show hosts. I invite you to try. Jello Biafra, lead singer from a group called the Dead Kennedys years ago, he said, if you want to analyze the news, watch the TV news with the sound off and try not to laugh. It's fun. Anyway, in any case, on To Tell the Truth, the panel of celebrities asked questions of the 3 contestants, trying to determine the truth. It was very exciting, and the laughter and the tension would slowly build on the show up until the climax when the host would finally say, "Will the real Mr. X please stand up?" It was a great show, and all at once, we all found out what the truth was. On the cover of your orders of service is the promotional advertisement for a fairly recent film, a 2015 film called Truth, starring Cate Blanchett and Robert Redford. It's a brilliant film based on a true story of one of Network News' biggest scandals. Mary Mapes, played by Cate Blanchett, believes that she has broken the biggest story of the 2004 election, revelations of the sitting president and his military service. But when slanderous allegations come pouring in, sources change their stories, document authenticity is questioned, and the casualties begin to mount. One of these casualties, unfortunately, was the career of an investigative journalist named Dan Rather. What a good man he is. What a decent and very good man. So, as legend has it, changing the subject just a little bit, I'm curious about what our associations are with the truth. You know, what do we as Americans value about it? How do we hold it dear? So, as the legend goes, when George was about 6 years old, he received a hatchet. Do you know this story? He received a hatchet for his birthday and soon started chopping everything in his path, including his father's favorite cherry tree. This is George Washington, of course. When his father asked him what happened to the tree, George hesitated, but then said famously, "I cannot tell a lie, Papa. I did cut down the tree with my hatchet." And George's father, who had taught him the value of honesty, embraced him and did not punish him. Now, I've told the truth to my parents many times and it never got me out of the stew, so I'm a little bit upset with the story, but I'll just take it. This is a touching story about young George Washington, and it has been told to us for hundreds of years, for 213 years to be precise. This story has become part of our cultural understanding of ourselves. It honors and upholds deeply American value, one that we cleave to, one that we hold dear as a people, as a nation, as a country. It is quite beautiful. I think hampered only by the fact that the young historian named Charlotte, who I watched on the news the other day, cut this beautiful story down to size. She was maybe 10, 11 years old when she asked the folks at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, if the cherry tree story was true. She said, "Hi, my name is Charlotte. Did George Washington actually chop down the cherry tree?" On behalf of those who work at Mount Vernon, which is a full-on museum, it's a national tourist attraction now, a docent named Jeremy Ray responded to Charlotte's inquiry as kindly as he knew how. It was not the first time that Jeremy had been asked to respond to this question. "Did George Washington cut down the cherry tree?" he repeated. And then he said, "You know, this is one of the questions that we get probably most here at Mount Vernon. And a lot of people are upset to hear that no, he didn't actually cut down the cherry tree." So where did this story come from? It actually comes from one of General Washington's earliest biographers, a man who is known as Parson Weems. He wanted to tell a story about George Washington as a young man and as a child to really bring home his virtues and everything that was good about George Washington. The problem is that we don't really know a whole lot about George Washington when he was young, so Parson Weems kind of made up a story about Washington and telling the truth. So what better way, this is still I'm quoting, what better way to get the story across to the youth of this nation about being truthful and honest than to make up a story? End quote. Okay. I think this is endearing. I think it's actually rather cute. The childhood story of a founding father that teaches honesty that isn't true. There's something deeply American about this. I'm not being sardonic. I believe in this country. I believe that this country numbers among the bravest countries on earth. We stumble, sometimes tragically. We get it wrong sometimes. But once we see the error of our ways, we make the course correction. We want to do what we think is right. It's not important that the details of a childhood story about being honest actually aren't true. It's important to be honest about the fictional parts of life that lead us on to wonder and peace of mind. An older poet once wrote these words: "Rage. Goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son, Achilles. Murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighter souls, but made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds, and the will of Zeus was moving towards its end. Begin, muse, when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. What drove them to fight with such fury? These are the first words of Homer's Iliad. These are the first words of what we now regard as the literary tradition of Western culture. Maria Tucci, who introduces this great classic, tells us about the Robert Fagel's translation, I'm quoting here, the authoritative translation of Homer's Iliad, the epic poem about Ilium, or Troy, that dramatizes the war of an invading Greek army that may have been fought, though the facts remain in doubt, to win the city of Troy more than 3,000 years ago. She then asks, how did the Trojan War begin? And she goes on to answer this question in her way, but she readily admits that the accounts vary. These accounts vary, and unfortunately they contradict one another. Obviously, they cannot all be true. But just because the details might be somewhat fictional doesn't mean that the poetry isn't true. It doesn't mean that the older bard isn't delivering a true value. A younger poet once wrote these words, "And there I stood alone and afraid. I dropped to my knees and there I prayed, and I promised him everything I could give, if only he would make the music live. And he promised that it would live once more, but this time 1 would equal 4. Now, some of this isn't true. 1 does not equal 4, even for extremely high values of 1. That was a little math joke. I don't think it's funny either. I secretly do. These words were deleted from the final version of a poem that is familiar to us, the refrain of which is, "So bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye." But this is no more true than the old story about the cherry tree. Now, I once met Miss American Pie. Excuse me, I met Mrs. American Pie. I met a woman who was married to Don McLean, the younger poet who wrote this song. I met her in the Starlight Lounge. I met her in the French Quarter in New Orleans. I was sitting next to her at a bar, and she'd be glad to tell you, and Don McLean would agree, that Don McLean never actually owned a Chevrolet. He'd tell you so himself. It's not an important part of the story. The important part of the story is about a girl who sang the blues, and the part about going down to the sacred store, and the part about the children screamed in the streets, and the lovers who cried, and the poets that dreamed when not a word was spoken. The part about what he called the 3 men I admire most, who headed out west for the left coast for some reason. These are the important parts of the story, even though none of these parts are actually true. How does one make sense of this? Is there an endless battlement between the realms of honesty and fiction, or is there a different way of looking at their relationship? Now, there's a wonderful writer in Delhi, in India. Her name is Arundhati Roy. There is no war within her. She writes beautifully about both realms. In the realm of fiction, she's written books like The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. In the realm of non-fiction, she's written books such as An Ordinary Person's Guide to Empire and The Algebra of Infinite Justice. There is no war within her, no contradiction. In these texts about war and violence, she has found her way to peace. She uses every tool that is available to her, everything depending on the needs of the story, and she explains that stories reveal themselves to us. They commission us. They insist on being told. They come through us, is what she says. Fiction and nonfiction are only different techniques of storytelling. For reasons that I don't fully understand, fiction dances out of me, she says. and nonfiction is wrenched out by the aching and broken world I wake up to every morning, end quote. She is stating this in the aftermath of 9/11, in an address that she delivered 22 years ago, this month, called Come September. She shared the experience of her creative process with us back then. She said, the theme of most of what I write, fiction as well as nonfiction, is the relationship between power and powerlessness, and the endless circular conflict that they are engaged in. John Berger, that most wonderful writer, once wrote, "Never again will a single story be told as if it is the only one. There can never be a single story. There are only ways of seeing. So when I tell a story, it is not as an ideologue who wants to pit one absolutist ideology against another, but as a storyteller who wants to share her way of seeing." So when one asks questions, as we have, questions like, how does one make sense of the fight between honesty and fiction? Questions like, is there a difference, are there different ways of looking at and honoring their relationship? It's important to keep the eloquent thoughts of Arundhati Roy in mind. When we don't, we lose something that is rare and precious. On January 21st of 2017, one day after the presidential inauguration, the new White House press secretary held a briefing in which he accused the media of unfairness, prejudice, and bias. He accused the media of deliberately underestimating the size of the crowd the day before, and stated that the presidential ceremony had drawn the largest audience ever to witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. According to the rapid transit ridership data and the photographic evidence, these claims and allegations were false. Aerial images showed the turnout for the inauguration of 2017 to be lower than the turnout for the inauguration of 2009. As you may recall, the new press secretary claimed that 420,000 people rode the metro that day in 2017. He claimed that only 317,000 had ridden the metro 4 years earlier. No source was ever provided to justify this claim, which was easily disproven by the ridership figures that are available through DC Metro. Now, I share these thoughts not for political purposes, but as lighthouse markers, safeguarding the existential disaster that lurks beneath the surface of things, one that leads full on to the abyss. So there are no such things as alternative facts. Despite the Wikipedia article, which reads as follows. Alternative facts was a phrase used by the U.S. counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, during a Meet the Press interview in 2017, in which she defended the White House Secretary Sean Spicer's false statements about attendance numbers at the inauguration. When pressed during the interview with Chuck Todd to explain why Spicer would utter provable falsehoods, Conway stated that Spicer was giving alternative facts. Todd responded, "Look, alternative facts are not facts. They are falsehoods." Now, there are no such things as alternative facts. The concept itself is a marker of our failure to appreciate the spectacular difference between what it means to share one's truth about the way one sees, one's way of seeing, and what it means to impose the consequences of one's way of being, truth or consequences, eloquence or empire, democracy, dictatorship, it's up to us. So-called alternative facts do not enrich or somehow diversify our lives. They weaken and crudely degrade the moral fabric of our culture. They corrode and grossly pervert how we make sense and meaning in our lives. They fail to honor and uphold deeply held American values, values we cleave to, values we hold dearly as a people, as a nation, and as a country. Values that a girl like Charlotte can believe in. Hi, my name is Charlotte. Did George Washington actually chop down the cherry tree? Deeper than the facts of the story are the values that inform our lives. Beneath alternative facts, there is nothing at all. Alternative facts slowly shatter our sense of community. One by one, they undermine the value of the common good. One by one, they undermine the meaning of the common good. They compromise our sense of moral integrity. They compromise our cultural coherence. They do not make us strong. They do not build us up. They break us down. They diminish us. They slyly enfeeble us, for they are the outward signs of our inward inability to honor and respect those with whom we disagree, and are therefore worthy neither of our honor or our respect. They degrade you as they do me, as they do Sean and Kellyanne. Our job as stewards, as participants, as practitioners of faith, and even as angrily protesting resistors against this faith, this universalist faith, our job is to hold the all. Our job is to hold the all, especially when others cannot hold the all, or when they are no longer willing to do so. What is the words of the song that we sing, Diane? I'm going to lift my sister up. She is not heavy. If I don't lift her up, I will fall down. It's very deep. Universalism is very brave. Universalism is that fierce. It is that loving and that compassionate. It's not unique in the practice of faith. It is unique to the depth of the practice of any faith. Any faith that surrenders and is truly caring. How can true faith be otherwise? Yet, as of late, we have been forcing it to be otherwise. Well, at least we have been pretending that we had the capacity to force it to be otherwise. Last year, there was a Christian seminarian whose name was James Talrico, and he delivered a sermon in the absence of his pastor, Dr. Jim Rigby, a theologian with whom he was studying. James Talrico boldly defended his Baptist faith from its detractors. He started his sermon with humor, with a funny little article that his mentor had sent him, which was the top 10 reasons why beer is better than religion. Reason number 1, when you have beer, you don't knock on people's door and try to give it away. Reason number 2, there are laws against forcing beers on minors who cannot think for themselves. Number 3, nobody has ever been burned at the stake because of their favorite brand of beer. Number 4, you don't have to wait 2,000 years for a second beer. And 5, if you've devoted your life to beer, there are groups around that can help you. I love me my playful, traditional, conservative, Christian theological colleagues. I am deeply inspired by how fervently and ardently they defend their faith, our larger faith. After this lighthearted introduction to his word, he launched into matters that were far more serious. He said, and this I quote, there is a cancer on our religion. Until we confess the sin that is Christian nationalism and exorcise it from our churches, our religion can do a lot more damage than can a 6-pack of Lone Star. There is nothing Christian about Christian nationalism. It is the worship of power, social power, economic power, political power, in the name of Christ. And it is a betrayal of Jesus of Nazareth. He told us that we would know them by their fruits. Jesus includes, Christian nationalism excludes. Jesus liberates, Christian nationalism controls. Jesus saves, Christian nationalism kills. Jesus started a universal movement based on mutual love. Christian nationalism is a sectarian movement based on mutual hate. Jesus came to transform this world. Christian nationalism is here to maintain the status quo. They have co-opted the Son of God. They have turned this humble rabbi into a gun-toting, gay-bashing, science-denying, money-loving, fear-mongering fascist. And it is incumbent upon all Christians to confront and denounce it, end quote. An amen rises audibly from a man in the gathered assembly. Now, I'm not a fundamentalist. I am a liberal theologian, and yet I do believe that the radically complex, infinitely loving, and thoroughly revolutionary message of Jesus of Nazareth is utterly betrayed in its current misuse. Its current misuse makes more difficult the conversations that we really need to have on things like the private right to choose and the public right to protest, on things like free speech and censorship, on our use and misuse of the death penalty, on marriage equality and gender expression, on issues of gun control, and more. There's a cartoon that's circulating online right now. A seasoned veteran and a young boy of maybe 9 or 10 years are at the edge of a cemetery standing side by side. The two are facing away from us. We cannot see their faces, but their bodies tell the story of remorse. Now, the cemetery grounds before them are crowded with crosses and granite markers. The burying field unfolds into the distance. We cannot see its end. Staring into the distance, the seasoned veteran says, "I lost my brothers on Omaha Beach in '44. How about you?" And without turning his head, the boy child responded, "At school, second period." Jesus was a Jew who was honored by Muslims and followed by all who understood his love. He was a healer, he was nonviolent. In his deepest heart, he was forgiving. In his time, empire was the norm and loving kindness was the alternative. This much hasn't changed. This is what the word alternative means. Its purpose is to resolve disputes, not to generate them. The word means interchange. It enriches public conversation. It does not impoverish it. We've been using the word alternative as if it really means substitution. We've been using it to imply diversity where little or none exists. We've been using it to suggest that there is a genuine acceptance in a discourse that is designed to function as dismissal. Kind words that don't create kindness. We've been shooting ourselves in the foot. This is the antithesis of loving kindness that is the alternative to empire. That's the halo truth. Unfortunately, we've been living out sometimes the pitchfork consequences. So let's end this practice so we can get back to the beauty in our lives. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, and that's all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. It was a wonderful and a terrible trick that my mother played on me when I was young. When I was young, when I would lie, I would scratch my head. I said, "Did I do that all the time?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" And she said, "I wanted to know when you were lying. Why would I tell you that I broke the code?" Beneath my lie, whatever it was a story of innocence and a story of hope and a story of not wanting to be rejected in some way. Beneath our differences is a story that holds us together. And I'm sure with just a little love and some humor, we'll be able to find it as we move forward. Maybe so. Blessed be, and amen.